Welcome to episode 8. As you can see, I finally get DCC fully set up on the layout, and I show off the new switcher. I'll be going over all the steps I took to get the NCE PowerCab installed. So let's get started. So I did film the unboxing. This box is from Lombard Hobbies. They had some good prices, so I decided to go with them. The two things I got was the new Atlas locomotive and the NCE PowerCab DCC Starter Set. The locomotive I decided to go with was the Burlington Northern GP40-2, road number 3042. This will make for the perfect switcher on my layout. I'll show it in much greater detail later on in the video. Now it's time to get going on setting up this DCC. First, I'll be unboxing the kit and showing all that's included. This little pamphlet here shows all the items, and also it shows a little diagram on how to easily set it up. There is of course a manual for more info. So this first cable here won't be used at all, unless you have a separate controller that you bought also. This next tiny piece is what you use to plug your bus wires into, and then that connects into the panel. The panel is this. This is where everything gets plugged into. This is the cord for the remote, and here's your power supply that plugs into the wall. And lastly, the remote. Here it is all laid out. All will be used except for this cable, like I said before. What I started out doing was mounting the panel in the layout with a couple of screws. This will most likely be temporary. Here's all the items I'll be using, all of which can be found at Home Depot or Lowe's. First is this 14 gauge solid copper wire in both white and red. Thermostat wire that breaks up into two separate 18 gauge solid copper wires that will be used for feeders. Tap splices that are specifically made for 18 to 14 gauge wire. And lastly, some cable clamps just to hold it all up. First thing I did was make the main bus wires by twisting the 14 gauge wire 3 times every foot or so, then connecting the small piece I showed earlier to the end. You'll want these wires to be the length of your layout. This is just some electrical tape just to keep them together. I don't plug it in just yet, but I do mount it and shape the wires the way I want it to flow. The cable clamps do work great, but you do need your own screws. Here's where my cable ends, which will be extended later on. I decided to draw a mock-up of the visual idea I have for wiring all this. These two wires are the bus wires that are 14 gauge solid copper. These wires are twisted 3 times every foot per NCE recommendations. I do want to label the colors of my bus wires, which is red and white. The ending of my bus wires here will be eventually extended by connecting another section of bus wires for the next section. But no need to worry about that right now. Now I did label the bus section main power, but what I'm drawing now are the future feeder wires that are 18 gauge red and white, and those are the ones that connect to the track to the bus. Those feeder wires will go to each row of the track, and every 3 or 4 feet if the track is longer than that. What they do suggest having is a program section that's not connected to the rest of the layout. This is for programming a single locomotive to your system. These are a couple of examples in the manual of what I'm talking about. For gluing down the track, I use tacky glue. I just lift the track slightly and apply a decent amount under the ties. Alright, now to show how I put all my feeder wires and how I soldered and connected them. First up is the 18 gauge wire. When separated, you do get two separate 18 gauge wires in both red and white. A tool I suggest picking up is a wire stripper used for stripping and cutting the wire. It also does a good job of showing the sizes of the wires. Next up are those tap splices. And of course a drill with the smallest bit that I could find. When drilling, I go in between the ties and make sure to go all the way through. For now, I'll just be brushing the debris away. After cutting each color of the 18 gauge wire, I also make sure it's long enough to reach the bus wires below. I strip one end of both wires, and then I bend it at a 90-degree angle. To solder everything up, I'll be using my Weller solder iron. One thing I always make sure is that the red is on the rear rail, and the white is on the front. And I make sure throughout the entire layout that it's that way only. Here's a close-up of it all. Now it's time for the actual soldering, which is an art of its own. I just go for it, as you can see, but you can always prepare by putting some solder on the wires beforehand, which does make it a little bit easier. For me, either way works. I repeat the process on the other side, and there it is, all soldered. It's rough now, but I'll sand it smooth later on. Under the layout is the next step. We need to attach the wires that we just soldered to the bus. Red to red and white to white. Pretty simple. Now these tap splices come in handy. The bus wire goes in the front hole, and the feeder goes into one that's blocked. With the correct tool, I squeeze the metal piece in the middle all the way down to make sure there's a solid connection. I then repeat the process with the white feeder. Each row of the layout will have the same thing done. Here's the other side of the layout where I did have a few slip-ups, but it's all completely otherwise. These, as you can tell, are the spots that got soldered. And here's the bottom where all the wiring is. We're now ready to go. Cable is connected, and the red light means we have power. I don't go over programming the locomotive, not that it's overcomplicated, but maybe I'll make a video of that in the future. For now, I want to show off some of the detail of the GP40-2. And after this, we finally start it up and get to hear it in all of its glory. Here I'm testing the switches to make sure that there's no dead spots or shorts, which there wasn't any, thankfully. Alright, so that's going to be pretty much the end of this episode today. I got a lot done, I got the DCC wiring complete, and I finally got the locomotive running. And it was super awesome to hear all the sounds and all the things it comes with. In next week's episode, I'll give a brief overview of what I did in this week's, just so you have a little bit more of an understanding if you're confused at this point. And I'll also go into detail of the controller and the locomotive and all the buttons and all that. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this longer episode finally. It's been a long time coming and it's nice to finally get it all complete. Now it's time to move forward onto scenic stuff and most likely ballasting. So with that note, I hope you guys enjoyed the episode and I will catch you guys in next week's one.